Sometimes the strongest man in the city isn't the one who walks in with bodyguards. Sometimes it's the one who quietly stays until someone stops carrying the weight of the world alone. The last school bus had disappeared nearly 3 hours earlier, leaving Jefferson Elementary wrapped in the quiet loneliness that only old buildings seem to understand after sunset. Long hallways glowed beneath rows of tired fluorescent lights. Bulletin boards decorated with construction paper stars waited patiently for another morning of noisy children. Outside, a cold October rain painted silver streaks across the classroom windows, while downtown Chicago shimmered several miles away beneath low clouds. Savannah Reed remained inside room 214, unaware that the cleaning staff had already finished the opposite wing. Report cards covered nearly every inch of her desk. Math quizzes formed one stack. Reading journals formed another. Half-finished lesson plans sat beside an empty coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. At 28, Savannah loved teaching more than she had ever loved anything else. She simply hadn't realized love could be this exhausting. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes burned. She rubbed her temples before reaching for another paper, determined to finish just one more assignment before going home. That promise had quietly repeated itself for nearly 4 hours. A soft yawn escaped before she smiled to herself. Every child in her classroom deserved someone who believed in them, especially the ones who arrived hungry, frightened, or convinced they weren't smart enough. She refused to become another adult who gave up too early. Eventually, the words on the pages blurred together. The rain became softer. The ticking clock above the whiteboard slowed into a distant rhythm. Without realizing it, Savannah rested her head against folded arms. The red grading pen slipped gently from her fingers. Room 214 fell completely still. Less than a mile away, a convoy of black SUVs rolled silently through rain-soaked streets, attracting respectful distance from every other driver. The lead vehicle stopped in front of Jefferson Elementary as though the aging brick building mattered more than the glittering skyscrapers surrounding it. Security stepped out first, scanning every entrance before a tall man exited the second SUV. Roman Castellano wore a charcoal overcoat over an impeccably tailored dark suit, yet nothing about his presence felt theatrical. People often expected powerful men to make noise. Roman rarely did. He simply looked at the school for several quiet seconds before speaking only 4 words. "Wait for me here." None of the security team questioned the instruction. They never did. Roman crossed the empty parking lot alone. Rain tapped softly against his shoulders while an aging brass key appeared between his fingers. The front entrance unlocked with surprising ease. He stepped inside like someone returning to a place that still belonged to him, though no photograph on the walls carried his name. The familiar scent of old books, floor polish, and dry erase markers lingered in the air. His footsteps remained almost silent as he walked through hallways filled with student artwork. He paused briefly beside a faded mural painted years ago by children whose names had long since graduated from memory. His hand brushed lightly across chipped blue paint before continuing toward the second floor. Unfortunately for Savannah, she never heard him approaching. Room 214 stood slightly open. Warm desk lamps illuminated scattered papers, while soft rain echoed against the windows. Roman stopped in the doorway. There she was, a young teacher asleep over unfinished work. One strand of chestnut hair had fallen across her face. Red ink stained the side of her hand. Even sleeping, she looked as though she had simply run out of strength before running out of responsibility. Roman said nothing. Instead, he quietly removed his gloves and picked up the grading pen lying on the floor beside her chair. He placed it carefully back on the desk without making a sound. His eyes wandered across the essays, waiting to be graded. Every page carried encouraging comments written in neat handwriting. Even incorrect answers received patient explanations instead of criticism. Something almost invisible shifted behind Roman's normally unreadable expression. He slowly pulled a student chair beside her desk and sat down. No phone calls, no meetings, no instructions whispered through an earpiece, only silence. Outside, the city continued racing toward tomorrow while room 214 seemed suspended somewhere between yesterday and sunrise. Minutes became an hour, then another. The rain faded, wind settled. Moonlight slowly surrendered to the pale blue glow of approaching dawn. Roman never once looked at his watch. What Savannah couldn't possibly know was that this classroom held one secret capable of explaining why the most feared man in Chicago had chosen to spend an entire night protecting the sleep of a teacher who had never met him before. And when she finally opened her eyes, everything she believed about that stranger would begin to change. Morning arrived quietly, almost apologetically, as pale sunlight spilled across the rows of tiny desks and painted long golden lines across the classroom floor. Savannah Reed stirred before she fully opened her eyes. For one confused second, she thought she had fallen asleep at home with a stack of papers beside her bed. Then the familiar smell of dry erase markers, crayons, and old textbooks returned all at once. Her neck felt stiff. Her coffee cup was still sitting exactly where she had left it. Every paper remained spread across her desk, except one thing had changed. The grading pen she clearly remembered dropping now rested neatly beside her hand. She frowned and slowly lifted her head. A man sat quietly in the student chair next to her desk. He was reading one of the classroom library books with surprising patience, his posture relaxed, his dark overcoat folded across the back of another chair. Sunlight reached his face before she could fully process what she was seeing. He looked less intimidating than someone dressed entirely in black should have looked, yet there was something unmistakable about the calm authority surrounding him. It was the kind that never needed to announce itself. Savannah instinctively straightened in her chair. "I am sorry," she said, embarrassed. "The school is not open yet. How did you get in here?" The man closed the book gently before meeting her eyes. "You looked like you needed the sleep more than you needed another interruption." His voice remained low and steady, almost careful. She blinked twice, still trying to understand why a complete stranger was sitting inside her classroom before sunrise. Did you stay here all night?" he answered with the smallest nod. "You fell asleep grading papers." Savannah stared at him in disbelief. "Most people would have woken me up. Most people probably would." His answer carried no pride, only quiet honesty. She looked around the room again, searching for some explanation that made sense. Nothing had been touched except the pen. None of the student projects had moved. Her purse remained beside her desk, exactly where she had left it. Whatever reason this stranger had for being here, he had respected every inch of her classroom. "Who are you?" she finally asked. He stood, picked up his coat, and offered a polite smile that somehow felt older than his face. "Roman, no last name, no explanation, just Roman." Before Savannah could ask another question, footsteps echoed somewhere down the hallway. The school custodian appeared outside the classroom carrying a mop bucket. He stopped instantly after noticing the man inside. Surprise flashed across his face before quickly becoming something closer to respect. "Morning, Miss Reed," he called. "Everything all right?" Savannah hesitated. I think so." The custodian nodded toward Roman with unexpected familiarity. "Good to see you again, sir." Roman acknowledged him with a simple nod. No introductions, no conversation. The exchange lasted only a second, but Savannah noticed it immediately. Whoever Roman was, he had been inside this building before. After he walked toward the hallway, she hurried after him. "Wait," he stopped without turning around. "You still have not told me why you were here." For a brief moment, silence settled between them. Rainwater still clung to the windows outside, sparkling beneath the morning sun. Children would begin arriving within the hour. Roman finally looked back. "Some places deserve to know they have not been forgotten." The answer raised more questions than it solved. Before Savannah could respond, a black SUV slowly pulled into the faculty parking lot. She had not noticed it earlier. Two professionally dressed men stepped out but remained several yards away, never approaching the school entrance. They simply waited. Roman buttoned his coat. "Have a good day, Miss Reed." She watched him walk away with measured steps, disappearing through the front entrance without once looking back. The moment he left, the building somehow felt quieter than it had only seconds earlier. Less than 10 minutes later, teachers began arriving one after another, filling the hallways with cheerful greetings and rolling carts loaded with classroom supplies. Savannah tried convincing herself the entire encounter had simply been a strange consequence of exhaustion. It almost worked until the assistant principal entered her room carrying the weekly announcements. "You are here early," she smiled. "Or maybe you never left." Savannah laughed awkwardly. "Long night." The assistant principal noticed the open classroom door before glancing toward the parking lot. Savannah hesitated again. A man named Roman. The smile disappeared almost instantly. "Roman?" Savannah nodded. "Do you know him?" The assistant principal remained silent for several uncomfortable seconds before quietly answering. "Only a handful of people still remember why he comes back to this school." Then she walked away before Savannah could ask another question. leaving her standing alone beside the classroom window as the black SUV disappeared into Chicago traffic, carrying with it a mystery that seemed older than the building itself. The rest of the week refused to leave Savannah Reed's thoughts alone. Every morning began with multiplication tables, spelling quizzes, and cheerful voices echoing through room 214. Yet every quiet moment carried her mind back to the stranger who had chosen a child-sized chair over the comfort of his own world. She had met parents who worked 2 jobs, volunteers who donated supplies, and retired teachers who returned simply because they missed the laughter. But she had never met anyone who silently guarded a sleeping teacher without asking for recognition. By Thursday afternoon, she finally convinced herself that she had imagined the significance of the encounter. Chicago had a way of creating unusual stories. Perhaps this had simply been one of them. The final bell rang, and students poured into the hallway carrying colorful backpacks almost as large as they were. Savannah stood near the classroom door, exchanging high fives, reminding one student about tomorrow's science project and another about reading 20 minutes before bed. One little girl suddenly stopped and looked toward the front office windows. "Miss Reed," she whispered, "that nice man is back." Savannah followed the child's gaze. Across the parking lot, a familiar black SUV rested beneath a row of maple trees whose leaves had begun turning bright shades of orange and gold. The vehicle remained parked without blocking traffic or drawing attention. No one stepped out. It simply waited. "Do you know him?" the little girl asked. Savannah forced a reassuring smile. "I am not sure that I do." The child accepted the answer and hurried outside with her grandmother. Moments later, the parking lot emptied until only teachers remained. Savannah packed her laptop, locked her filing cabinet, and finally walked toward the front entrance. The SUV was still there. As she reached the sidewalk, the rear passenger door opened. Roman Castellano stepped out alone. He wore another dark suit, though this time without the overcoat. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of rain mixed with fallen leaves. He stood several feet away, leaving enough space that she never felt cornered. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening," she answered cautiously. "You keep appearing at my school." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "It has been my school much longer than it has been yours." That unexpected answer immediately caught her attention. "What does that mean?" Instead of responding directly, Roman looked toward the playground where a forgotten red ball rested beneath a swing set. Children's laughter had already faded, leaving only the creaking chains moving gently in the wind. "Does room 214 still have the old oak bookshelf?" he asked. Savannah blinked. "Yes, we keep our reading corner there. It used to stand in another classroom." She waited for him to continue, but he simply watched the school building with quiet familiarity. His attention never drifted toward his waiting vehicle or the men standing discreetly nearby. Everything about him suggested that this ordinary public school mattered far more than any business meeting he could have attended instead. "You know this building better than most of the staff," Savannah observed. "I remember the hallways." Again, his answer revealed almost nothing, while somehow saying far more than she could understand. Before she could ask another question, the school principal stepped outside carrying a cardboard box filled with donated library books. She stopped the moment she noticed Roman. "You came back," she said warmly. Roman stepped forward and accepted the heavy box before she could protest. "You should not carry this by yourself. You always say that," the principal laughed softly. "Some things never change." Savannah watched the exchange with growing confusion. The principal clearly knew him, yet she spoke with neither fear nor surprise. Instead, there was genuine gratitude in her expression. Together they carried the books inside the front office while Savannah followed several steps behind. Roman placed the box carefully beside the circulation desk. The principal thanked him before answering a phone call from another teacher. During the brief silence, Savannah noticed something hanging on the office wall that she had somehow overlooked for months. It was an old class photograph taken decades earlier. Dozens of smiling children sat in neat rows beside teachers whose fashions belonged to another era. One face near the back row immediately drew her attention. A young boy with dark hair and unusually serious eyes looked almost identical to Roman. Before she could move closer, another staff member unknowingly stepped in front of the photograph. When Savannah looked back again, Roman was already walking toward the exit. "You were a student here," she called after him. He paused with one hand resting lightly against the door. For the first time since they met, something vulnerable crossed his expression before disappearing just as quickly. "A very long time ago," he answered quietly. Then he left without another word. What Savannah did not know was that hidden inside a locked storage room on the second floor rested a collection of forgotten records that preserved the one chapter of Roman's childhood almost no one alive still remembered. And someone had quietly checked the lock only an hour before he arrived. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn air drifting through the cracked classroom windows, carrying the scent of damp leaves and freshly cut grass from the playground. Savannah Reed greeted each student with her usual smile, but her attention wandered every time footsteps echoed outside room 214. She kept telling herself that Roman Castellano had simply been a former student with an unusual attachment to the school. It was the only explanation that sounded reasonable, yet nothing about him ever felt ordinary. During lunch, the teachers gathered in the faculty lounge, trading stories about weekend errands and upcoming parent conferences. Savannah stirred her soup absent-mindedly before finally asking the question that had followed her since Thursday. "Does anyone know much about Roman Castellano?" The room became noticeably quieter. One teacher glanced toward another before returning her attention to a stack of worksheets. A veteran music instructor finally spoke. "People know the name." "From where?" Savannah asked. The woman shrugged gently. "Different circles than ours." Before anyone could elaborate, the principal entered carrying a folder of district paperwork, immediately changing the conversation to school funding and classroom budgets. The moment passed, but Savannah noticed the hesitation. Everyone seemed to know something. No one seemed willing to explain it. That afternoon, heavy clouds gathered once again above Chicago, dimming the sunlight long before dismissal. As students packed their backpacks, one energetic boy tugged on Savannah's sleeve. "Miss Reed?" Somebody fixed the basketball hoop. She looked outside. Maintenance crews had struggled with the damaged hoop for nearly 2 months, because the district claimed repairs would have to wait until spring funding became available. Yet there it stood, perfectly straight with a brand new backboard shining against the grey sky. Another teacher joined her at the window. "They finished before sunrise," he said. "Nobody knows who paid for it." Savannah looked across the playground without saying a word. For reasons she could not explain, one name immediately came to mind. After the final student left, she walked outside to inspect the newly repaired court. Fresh concrete still surrounded the support post. Everything had been completed professionally. A small maintenance sticker listed the installation company, but no donor name appeared anywhere. It was as though someone wanted the children to enjoy it without ever knowing who had made it possible. "Pretty nice, is it not?" the school custodian called while locking a side entrance. Savannah smiled. "The kids are going to love it," he nodded proudly. "Whoever arranged it specifically asked that no plaque be installed." She looked toward him. "Did they say why?" The older man rested both hands on his ring of keys before answering. "They said children should never feel like gratitude has to be attached to a name." His words lingered long after he disappeared inside the building. Twilight settled quickly. Savannah returned to room 214 to finish organizing tomorrow's science materials before heading home. As she placed construction paper into colorful bins, she noticed something unusual near the classroom doorway. One of the small student chairs had been positioned facing the teacher's desk instead of the reading corner. It was the same chair Roman had quietly occupied that first morning. She clearly remembered pushing it back against the table before leaving on Friday. Curious, she walked over and absentmindedly touched the worn wooden backrest. A tiny carving near one leg caught her eye. The initials RC had been etched into the wood decades earlier, almost hidden beneath layers of faded paint. Her heart skipped unexpectedly. Hundreds of students had attended Jefferson Elementary over the years. The initials could belong to anyone. Still, the coincidence unsettled her. Before she could think further, a soft knock interrupted the silence. The principal stood in the doorway holding a thin folder. "I thought you might still be here." Savannah accepted the folder. "What is this?" "Old classroom inventories. We are cleaning storage next month." She smiled apologetically. "Would you mind checking whether anything in room 214 should be archived?" Savannah flipped through the aging papers until one handwritten note slipped free and landed gently on the floor. It listed classroom furniture assignments from more than 20 years earlier. Beside one entry, someone had written in blue ink, "Student chair, transferred from room 108 after winter semester." She looked back at the carved initials. The principal noticed her curiosity. "Funny, is it not?" she said. "Some furniture stays longer than the people who first used it." Savannah looked up. "Do you know whose chair this was?" The principal hesitated, just long enough for the silence to become noticeable. "I know enough to say that some stories belong to the people who lived them." She offered a warm smile before leaving the classroom. Savannah remained alone as evening shadows slowly filled the room once more. She gently returned the old chair to its place among the others, unaware that less than a mile away Roman had just received a message informing him that someone had finally begun asking the same questions he had spent years hoping no one would ever need to ask. The following afternoon, the sky over Chicago settled into a blanket of soft gray clouds that made the school feel smaller, warmer, almost protected from the restless city beyond its brick walls. Savannah Reed spent the last hour of class helping her students build miniature bridges from craft sticks and glue. Laughter bounced from one corner of room 214 to the other as children proudly tested whose design could hold the most books before collapsing. For a little while, the questions surrounding Roman Castellano disappeared beneath ordinary moments that reminded her exactly why she had chosen this career. As the final bell rang, the room slowly emptied until only scattered supplies and the faint smell of glue remained. Savannah knelt beside one table collecting fallen craft sticks when she noticed one of her students lingering near the classroom door. 8-year-old Ethan held his backpack against his chest, his usual smile missing. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. The boy nodded too quickly. "I just do not want my grandma to worry." Before Savannah could ask another question, an elderly woman hurried into the hallway looking slightly out of breath. She apologized repeatedly for arriving late after a city bus had broken down several blocks away. Savannah assured her everything was fine and walked them both to the front entrance. As they stepped outside, cold wind swept across the parking lot. The grandmother looked toward the repaired playground with surprise. "I remember when this school looked forgotten," she said quietly. "Now it feels alive again," Savannah smiled. "The children deserve that." The older woman studied the playground for another moment before adding, almost to herself, "Someone has been taking care of this place without asking anyone to notice." Those words stayed with Savannah long after the pair disappeared down the sidewalk. She returned inside to finish preparing next week's reading activities. The building gradually emptied until only distant footsteps from the custodial staff echoed through the halls. Around 6 o'clock, the principal knocked softly on the classroom door. "You are staying late again," she said, with a knowing smile. Savannah laughed. "I promised myself I would leave before dark today. That promise sounds familiar." They shared a quiet laugh before the principal handed her a small envelope. This arrived without a return address. It was marked for room 214. Curious, Savannah opened it carefully. Inside was a receipt from a local bookstore. Every title listed belonged to the reading program she had requested at the beginning of the semester, but had been told the district could not afford. 40 brand new books had already been paid in full. There was no signature. Only one handwritten sentence rested at the bottom of the receipt. "Every child deserves a story that reminds them they matter." Savannah read the sentence twice before looking back at the principal. "Do you know who sent this?" The principal's expression remained calm. "I have learned not to ask questions when kindness arrives quietly." "Was it him?" The principal did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the classroom library where several empty shelves still waited to be filled. Sometimes gratitude grows stronger when it is anonymous. After she left, Savannah carefully placed the receipt inside her desk drawer, unable to shake the feeling that she already knew the answer. What she did not know was that less than a mile away, Roman sat inside a conference room overlooking the Chicago skyline, while several business associates discussed investments and expansion plans. He listened politely until one of them mentioned postponing a scheduled meeting because of a school supply delivery across town. Roman looked up for the first time in nearly 20 minutes. "Children should never wait because adults are discussing money," he said calmly. "Reschedule the meeting instead." No one argued. Within seconds, calendars shifted, and conversations moved on as though his decision required no explanation. An hour later, long after the meeting had ended, Roman stood alone beside a rain-speckled window watching the city lights appear one by one. A trusted associate quietly approached. "She has started asking questions," the man said. Roman remained silent. "Would you like us to discourage her curiosity?" Roman turned slowly, his expression composed but unmistakably firm. "No. She may eventually find the records. If she reaches them on her own, then she was meant to." The associate gave a respectful nod before leaving the room. Back at Jefferson Elementary, Savannah finally packed her laptop and switched off the classroom lights. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed a faint glow beneath a door she had never paid much attention to before. It was an old storage room at the far end of the second floor, a room that every teacher simply walked past without question. Tonight, however, someone had forgotten to close the door completely. Through the narrow opening, she caught a glimpse of dusty filing cabinets, faded yearbooks, and rows of carefully labeled archive boxes stretching into the darkness. Before she could take another step, the custodian called from downstairs that he was locking the building in 5 minutes. Savannah looked once more toward the half-open door before reluctantly turning away, never realizing that inside those forgotten cabinets rested a single worn student file capable of changing everything she believed about Roman Castellano. The image of the half-open storage room stayed with Savannah Reed throughout the entire weekend. She tried to focus on grocery shopping, laundry, and preparing next week's lesson plans, but every quiet moment brought her thoughts back to the forgotten hallway on the second floor. By Monday afternoon, curiosity had grown stronger than caution. After her students left for the day, she finished answering a few parent emails before making her way toward the old storage room, carrying a clipboard to make her visit appear official if anyone happened to ask. The hallway was unusually peaceful. Sunlight filtered through tall windows at the far end of the corridor, turning floating dust into tiny specks of gold. The storage room door was closed this time, but not locked. She pushed it open carefully. A cool, dry scent of aging paper and polished wood filled the room. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, while shelves overflowed with forgotten science kits, faded classroom decorations, and neatly labeled archive boxes. Everything had been organized decades earlier, and then quietly left behind as new school years replaced old ones. Savannah walked slowly between the shelves, reading handwritten labels that stretched back almost 30 years. Old yearbooks, maintenance reports, faculty newsletters, student awards. It felt less like entering a storage room and more like stepping into the memory of the entire school. A soft voice interrupted the silence behind her. "Looking for something?" She turned quickly to find the school librarian standing in the doorway with an apologetic smile. "I hope I am not breaking any rules," Savannah admitted. "Not really," the librarian replied. "Most teachers never come in here because they assume nothing interesting survived." She stepped inside and gently straightened a leaning stack of archive boxes. Sometimes old schools remember more than people do. Savannah hesitated before asking, "Do you know anything about Roman Castellano?" The librarian paused just long enough for the question to settle between them. "I know he still cares about this building. Was he a student here?" "Yes." The answer came easily. "Do you know what happened?" The librarian slowly shook her head. "Only pieces. Many records were sealed after staff changes years ago. Privacy policies became stricter." She glanced toward a row of locked cabinets near the back wall. "Some files are no longer available to ordinary staff." Savannah followed her gaze. One cabinet stood apart from the others with a newer lock and a small brass tag that simply read "Permanent Records." "Has anyone looked through those recently?" she asked. "Not that I know of." The librarian smiled kindly. "Although I have noticed fresh dust patterns every now and then." Before Savannah could ask what that meant, voices echoed from the hallway. The librarian excused herself to help a delivery driver downstairs, leaving Savannah alone once again. She wandered deeper into the room until an old display board caught her attention. Several faded photographs had been pinned beneath a handwritten title that read Community Reading Week. Most of the pictures showed smiling children sitting cross-legged, while teachers read aloud from colorful storybooks. One photograph had partially slipped from its corner. Savannah gently lifted it back into place and froze. Standing near the back of the classroom was a teenage volunteer with unmistakably familiar eyes. Younger, leaner, wearing ordinary jeans instead of tailored suits. But there was no doubt, it was Roman. He looked no older than 17. Quietly helping a little boy sound out words from an illustrated chapter book. There was no security team, no expensive watch, no sign of power. Only a patient young man kneeling beside a child who looked proud after finally finishing the page. Savannah studied the photograph for several long seconds. The date beneath it had almost faded away, but one detail remained perfectly clear. It had been taken years after Roman had supposedly graduated from Jefferson Elementary. He had come back voluntarily. Why? A sudden gust from an open hallway window caused another photograph to flutter loose and drift onto the floor. Savannah picked it up carefully. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in blue ink. "Some students never stop belonging here." She read the words twice before placing the picture back exactly where she had found it. What she could not possibly know was that at that exact moment Roman was sitting alone inside a quiet downtown office, holding an equally faded photograph from the very same school. His thumb rested gently against the corner of the picture before he returned it to a weathered envelope he had carried for years. He closed the envelope without speaking, unaware that Savannah had just uncovered the first genuine piece of the story connecting him to Jefferson Elementary, while the truth hidden behind that connection still remained safely beyond her reach. Wednesday arrived wrapped in a steady autumn rain that turned the windows of Jefferson Elementary into mirrors reflecting warm classroom lights. Savannah Reed spent the morning helping her students rehearse for the annual reading celebration, listening as hesitant voices slowly became confident ones. Every encouraging smile reminded her of the faded photograph she had discovered in the archive room. She could still picture the young Roman kneeling beside a child with the same quiet patience she witnessed the morning he had allowed her to sleep. The image refused to leave her mind. After dismissal, the principal stopped by room 214 carrying 2 folders and a small cardboard box filled with newly delivered library books. "Would you mind helping me sort these?" she asked. Savannah gladly agreed. Together they carried the books into the school library while soft rain drummed against the roof above them. The principal carefully placed each title onto a rolling cart before pausing beside an old display cabinet. Without saying a word, she unlocked one of the glass doors and removed a faded plaque covered with the names of former faculty members. Her fingers rested gently on one name before she looked toward Savannah. "Do you remember asking me why Roman keeps returning?" Savannah nodded. "I do." The principal took a slow breath. "Perhaps it is time you knew part of the answer." The library suddenly felt much quieter. Even the rain outside seemed to soften. "More than 20 years ago," the principal began, "there was a teacher here named Eleanor Hayes. She taught 4th grade in this very building. She believed every child deserved one adult who never stopped believing in them." Savannah listened without interrupting. One winter morning, a quiet little boy arrived long before school started. His family life was difficult, and he often came early simply because he felt safer inside these walls than anywhere else. The principal smiled gently at the memory. Miss Hayes never asked questions that would embarrass him. She simply unlocked her classroom every morning, made hot chocolate from the teacher's lounge, and placed a book on his desk before the first bell rang. Savannah slowly realized where the story was leading. That little boy was Roman. The principal nodded. "Yes." The revelation settled over the room with unexpected weight. Suddenly, every unanswered question began rearranging itself into something that finally made sense. The repaired playground, the donated books, the silent visits, the student chair. The nights spent walking familiar hallways. None of it had been about power. It had been about gratitude that had survived into adulthood. Did Miss Hayes know what he would become? Savannah asked quietly. "No one can predict another person's future," the principal replied. She only knew that every frightened child deserved kindness before judgment. Savannah looked toward the rows of library shelves where dozens of children would soon search for stories of their own. "Is that why he keeps helping the school?" The principal smiled. "Roman once told me that everything valuable in his life began in a classroom where someone chose compassion over assumptions." Before Savannah could ask another question, the principal carefully returned the plaque to its place inside the cabinet. "There is more to the story," she admitted softly, "but that part belongs to Roman if he ever decides to tell it himself." The conversation ended there. Neither woman spoke again as they finished organizing the books. Later that evening, Savannah gathered her things and stepped outside, beneath a sky still heavy with rain clouds. Across the street, a familiar black SUV waited without drawing attention. This time, instead of feeling uneasy, she crossed the sidewalk toward it. Roman a folded umbrella but made no move to open it. He simply waited until she stopped a respectful distance away. "I know now," she said quietly. He studied her expression without speaking. "You were the little boy." For several seconds only the rain answered. Roman finally gave the smallest nod. "Miss Hayes changed my life before anyone else believed it could change." His voice remained calm, but there was something deeply genuine beneath every word. Savannah realized she was no longer looking at the city's most mysterious businessman. She was looking at the child who had never forgotten the teacher who welcomed him before sunrise with a warm drink and a book. Yet even as that truth brought them closer, what Savannah still did not know was why every mention of Eleanor Hayes caused a shadow to cross Roman's face. Because the greatest promise he had ever made inside Jefferson Elementary remained unspoken. Waiting for the moment when the past would ask him to keep it one final time, the rain finally stopped overnight, leaving Chicago washed clean beneath a brilliant autumn sunrise. Golden light stretched across the playground as children raced toward the entrance carrying oversized backpacks and half-finished conversations. Savannah Reed stood at the classroom doorway, greeting every student by name, but something inside her had quietly shifted. Ever since learning about Roman Castellanos' connection to Jefferson Elementary, she no longer saw an untouchable man surrounded by mystery. She saw the frightened little boy who had once arrived before dawn simply because one classroom had felt safer than the rest of the world. The thought stayed with her throughout the day. Every time she poured encouragement into a struggling reader or patiently explained another math problem, she wondered how many futures were quietly changing without anyone noticing. After school, the library buzzed with volunteers preparing for the annual family reading night. Parents arranged folding chairs while teachers decorated bulletin boards with colorful paper leaves, displaying each student's favorite book. Savannah carried stacks of novels from one table to another until she noticed a familiar figure standing alone near the back of the auditorium. Roman had arrived without security inside the building, dressed simply in a dark sweater beneath a charcoal jacket. He blended into the room more easily than she would have believed possible. Several longtime staff members greeted him warmly before returning to their work, treating him not as an important visitor, but as someone who had never truly left. Savannah walked toward him with an easy smile. "I did not expect to see you here today." Roman glanced around the room as children tested microphones for the evening program. "I have attended this event for many years." She looked surprised. "Most people are paying attention to the children." His answer carried the same quiet humility she had begun recognizing in him. A little girl suddenly ran across the room holding a picture book almost as large as her arms. She stopped in front of Roman without hesitation. "Can you reach the top shelf?" she asked innocently. Roman smiled and took the book from her hands before placing it carefully onto the highest display shelf. "There you go, thank you." The child hurried away without realizing who he was. Savannah watched the exchange with quiet admiration. There was no hesitation in his movements, no attempt to impress anyone, only simple kindness offered without expectation. As families slowly filled the library that evening, the principal welcomed everyone before inviting volunteers to read aloud in different classrooms. To Savannah's surprise, Roman quietly accepted a copy of Charlotte's Web and disappeared into a nearby reading corner where a dozen children gathered around him. His voice remained calm and steady, never theatrical, allowing the story itself to shine. The children listened with complete attention, laughing at the gentle moments and leaning forward during every page. Standing unnoticed in the hallway, Savannah realized she had never seen him more comfortable than he was sitting in a tiny classroom surrounded by children. It was not power that fit him best. It was purpose. Later, after the families had gone home and volunteers stacked empty chairs, Savannah found Roman returning the book to the library cart. "Miss Hayes would have liked seeing that," she said softly. He lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering. "She believed every child deserved someone willing to read one more chapter." Savannah smiled. "It sounds like you remember every word she ever told you. Some lessons become part of who you are." They walked together through the quiet hallway without rushing toward the exit. Outside, the evening sky glowed deep orange as the last sunlight reflected across classroom windows. Savannah finally asked the question that had been growing inside her since the principal shared the story. "If Miss Hayes changed your life, why do I still feel like there is something you have never forgiven yourself for?" Roman stopped beside the old oak tree near the playground. For the first time, silence lingered longer than either of them expected. His expression softened with unmistakable sadness, though he never looked away from the school building. "Because gratitude sometimes arrives too late," he answered quietly. Before Savannah could ask what he meant, the school bell tower chimed the hour, its familiar sound echoing across the empty playground. Roman offered a polite nod and walked toward the waiting SUV without another word. Savannah remained beneath the fading sky, unable to shake the feeling that the greatest chapter of his story had still not been told, and somewhere inside Jefferson Elementary, a forgotten promise continued waiting to be remembered. The following week settled into a comfortable rhythm that somehow felt different from every week before it. Savannah Reed still arrived before sunrise to prepare her classroom. But now she occasionally found small reminders that kindness could exist without applause. Fresh boxes of crayons appeared in the supply closet after she quietly mentioned during a faculty meeting that several students had begun sharing broken ones. A leaking classroom window that had waited months for repairs was suddenly fixed over a single weekend. Even the old piano in the music room, silent for nearly a year, returned to life without anyone claiming credit. Every improvement carried the same invisible signature. Someone cared enough to act, yet never enough to be recognized. Savannah no longer needed anyone to tell her who that someone was. One Friday afternoon, the principal invited her into the front office after dismissal. "Would you mind helping me move a few boxes?" she asked. Together they carried several archive cartons into the same storage room Savannah had explored days earlier. As they worked, the principal stopped beside one of the locked filing cabinets. She reached into her pocket, removed an old brass key, and unlocked a narrow drawer. "There is something you should see," she said softly. She removed a thin folder that had yellowed with age and carefully laid it across a wooden table. The cover simply read Student Support Records. Inside were handwritten notes from teachers who had quietly documented extra help provided to children facing difficult circumstances at home. Savannah slowly turned the pages until one name caught her attention: Roman Castellano. His attendance records showed dozens of mornings when he had arrived more than an hour before classes officially began. There were no disciplinary reports, no complaints. Instead, nearly every page mentioned the same teacher, Miss Eleanor Hayes. One note written in careful blue ink altogether: "Roman stayed after school again today, finished another chapter book, helped organize classroom supplies before going home." He smiled for the first time in weeks. Progress is sometimes measured in very small moments. Another note, dated several months later, read, "He asked whether classrooms ever stop being safe after children grow up. I told him that kindness leaves the lights on long after everyone goes home." Savannah closed the folder for a moment, overcome by the simple humanity contained inside ordinary school paperwork. "She really changed him," she whispered. The principal nodded. "She never tried to change the man he might become. She simply loved the child standing in front of her." Savannah carefully reopened the folder. Near the back rested a sealed envelope bearing Roman's name in Eleanor Hayes' handwriting. "Has he seen this?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because Miss Hayes instructed the school to give it to him only if he ever returned after she was gone." Savannah looked up in surprise. "But he comes here all the time." The principal lowered her eyes. "He has never once asked for anything, not even this." The words lingered heavily between them. Later that evening, Savannah left the school carrying thoughts that felt larger than the city itself. She found Roman standing alone near the repaired playground, watching several neighborhood children enjoy the basketball court long after school had ended. There were no security guards nearby this time, only distant laughter and the rustling of autumn leaves. She walked beside him without speaking. For several quiet moments, neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. Finally, Savannah asked, "Did Miss Hayes ever tell you why she kept opening her classroom so early every morning?" Roman smiled faintly without taking his eyes off the children. "I asked her that once. She said that every child deserves one place where they never have to earn the right to feel welcome." Savannah felt those words settle deep inside her heart. They explained everything she had witnessed since meeting him: the books, the repairs, the reading nights. Even the morning he had allowed an exhausted teacher to sleep instead of waking her, he had been protecting the feeling Miss Hayes once gave him. Savannah turned toward him with quiet certainty. "You have spent years repaying a kindness that never asked to be repaid." Roman's expression softened. "Some debts are too beautiful to finish paying." Before she could answer, the school custodian stepped outside carrying a small cardboard package. "Mr. Castellano," he called. "The principal asked me to give you this if I saw you." Roman accepted the package politely. His eyes immediately recognized the familiar handwriting on the envelope resting inside. For the first time since Savannah had known him, the calm certainty that always surrounded him seemed to disappear because he realized that after all these years, Miss Eleanor Hayes had left behind one final message, and whatever waited inside that envelope was about to change both of their lives forever. Roman Castellano did not open the envelope immediately. He held it with both hands as though the paper itself carried a heartbeat he was afraid to disturb. The familiar handwriting across the front had survived the years with remarkable grace. Eleanor Hayes. Even after all this time, seeing her name seemed to pull the city around him into complete silence. Savannah Reed remained beside him without speaking. She sensed that whatever rested inside the envelope belonged to a chapter of his life no one else had ever been invited to witness. The playground behind them slowly emptied as the last neighborhood children headed home with basketballs tucked beneath their arms. Golden evening light stretched across the repaired court, reflecting softly against the classroom windows. Roman finally broke the seal. A single folded letter slipped into his hand. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but every word remained clear. He read the first line quietly to himself before stopping altogether. His eyes remained fixed on the page while the breeze gently lifted one corner of the letter. Savannah noticed the smallest change in his expression. Not grief, not regret. Something gentler, something that looked remarkably like peace arriving after a very long journey. Several quiet moments passed before Roman folded the letter once more. "She knew," he said softly. Savannah looked toward him. "Knew what?" He smiled with a warmth she had never seen before. "She knew I would come back one day." He carefully handed her the letter. "You should read it." Savannah hesitated. "Are you sure?" Roman answered with a simple nod. She unfolded the page with great care. The handwriting felt personal without being private, as though it had been written for anyone willing to choose kindness. "Dear Roman, if you are reading this, then you kept your promise. I always believed you would. You once asked me whether a classroom could still protect someone after they became an adult. The answer has never changed. It can, but only if people like you decide to keep opening the door for someone else. Do not spend your life trying to repay me. Spend it becoming the reason another child believes tomorrow will be better than today. If you ever meet another teacher who quietly carries more than anyone notices, remind her that she is not carrying it alone. Kindness always survives when someone chooses to continue it. I have never been proud of what you accomplished. I have always been proud of who you chose to become." Savannah lowered the letter slowly. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion, not because the words were dramatic, but because they were so profoundly simple. She finally understood why Roman had repaired playgrounds without signing his name, donated books without accepting recognition, and spent an entire night protecting the sleep of an exhausted teacher. None of those acts had been random. Every one of them had been another sentence in a letter that had begun decades earlier inside Jefferson Elementary. "She already forgave whatever you thought you still owed," Savannah whispered. Roman looked toward the school building as warm light reflected across the old brick walls. "I spent years believing I had to earn the life she believed I deserved." Savannah folded the letter carefully before returning it to him. "She never asked you to earn it. She asked you to share it." Those words settled between them with quiet certainty. Roman looked back toward the classrooms where lights still glowed inside a few windows. "There is one more thing I need to do." The next morning, before the first students arrived, teachers gathered in the library after discovering workers quietly assembling new bookshelves, comfortable reading chairs, and soft lamps throughout the reading corners. Every classroom from kindergarten through 5th grade had received the same thoughtful improvements overnight. There were no banners, no photographs, and no announcement identifying the donor. Only a small handwritten card rested inside each classroom library. It contained the exact same sentence: "Every child deserves one place where they never have to earn the right to feel welcome." Savannah stood silently inside room 214, recognizing the words immediately. She smiled as children began filling the room with laughter once again. Less than a mile away, Roman watched the school from the back seat of his waiting vehicle. When one of his associates quietly suggested placing his family's foundation name on the new library program, Roman gently shook his head. "No, people should know who made this possible," the associate replied. Roman looked toward the children disappearing through the front doors. They already do. What neither of them realized was that Savannah had just picked up the small handwritten card from her classroom shelf, and on the back she discovered 4 carefully written words that only she was ever meant to read. "Thank you for staying." The 4 handwritten words remained in Savannah Reed's mind long after the school day ended. "Thank you for staying." They were simple, almost impossibly ordinary, yet they carried a weight that no expensive gift ever could. She slipped the small card inside the same planner where she kept encouraging notes from students, knowing instinctively that she would never throw it away. Over the following days, Jefferson Elementary felt subtly different. The new reading corners quickly became every child's favorite place in the building. Students who had once rushed through independent reading now eagerly curled up in comfortable chairs with books resting across their laps. Teachers quietly noticed the change as well. The building seemed lighter, not because anything extraordinary had happened overnight, but because someone had invested in hope without asking for recognition. One afternoon, the principal stopped Savannah outside the library. "Would you walk with me for a moment?" she asked. Together they wandered through the quiet hallway where framed class photographs stretched back several generations. They stopped beneath the oldest display case near the front entrance. The principal pointed toward an empty space on the wall. "The school board wants to recognize the anonymous donor who funded all the improvements." Savannah smiled softly. "I have a feeling he will say no." The principal laughed. "He already did. Then why are they asking?" "Because they believe children should know who to thank." Savannah looked toward the empty wall for a long moment before answering. "Maybe they should thank every teacher who stayed late grading papers instead." The principal turned toward her with quiet admiration. "That sounds exactly like something Miss Hayes would have said." Later that evening, Savannah found Roman waiting beneath the large oak tree beside the playground. There was no black SUV in sight this time. He stood alone with his hands tucked inside the pockets of a simple dark coat while orange leaves drifted gently onto the sidewalk around him. The city seemed unusually quiet. Savannah walked beside him until they reached the repaired basketball court. Neither of them rushed to speak. "The school board wants to put your name on a plaque," she finally said. Roman smiled faintly. "I assumed they might. They think the children should know." He looked toward several students laughing on the swings with their parents nearby. "If they remember a name, they will eventually forget the reason behind it." Savannah nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you hope they remember instead?" Roman answered without hesitation that someone believed they mattered. The simplicity of his answer filled the silence between them. Savannah suddenly understood that everything he had built around the school had never been about preserving his own legacy. It had always been about protecting someone else's future. She reached into her bag and carefully removed the handwritten card he had left inside her classroom. "I wanted to return this," she said gently. Roman looked at it but made no move to take it. "Keep it." "Why?" "Because it was true." Savannah lowered the card slowly. "You thanked me for staying." Roman's expression softened beneath the fading afternoon light. "The morning I found you asleep in your classroom, I saw someone carrying the same quiet responsibility Miss Hayes carried years ago. You reminded me that there are still teachers willing to give more than anyone ever asks of them." Savannah felt her eyes fill with emotion, though she smiled through it. "I thought I was helping children." Roman shook his head gently. "You are, but sometimes you are also helping adults remember who they were supposed to become." A breeze carried another wave of leaves across the empty playground as the school bell rang once, signaling the end of an after-school activity. Savannah looked toward the classrooms glowing warmly in the evening light. "I used to think this building was changing because of you," she admitted. "Now I think it has always been changing people." Roman followed her gaze toward room 214. "That is what good schools do." They stood together in comfortable silence until the last families headed home. Before leaving, Savannah looked at him one final time. Miss Hayes was right about one thing. Roman raised an eyebrow with quiet curiosity. "Which part?" she smiled. "Kindness really does leave the lights on long after everyone goes home." Roman looked back at the illuminated windows of Jefferson Elementary, and for the first time in many years, the promise he had carried since childhood no longer felt like a burden. It finally felt like a life fully lived. Winter arrived gently in Chicago, wrapping Jefferson Elementary in crisp mornings and quiet afternoons filled with holiday artwork taped proudly across classroom walls. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling of room 214, while construction paper trees covered one bulletin board beneath the words, "Every story matters." Savannah Reed watched her students read aloud to younger classes with growing confidence, realizing that the greatest victories inside a school were almost always invisible to everyone outside its walls. One shy reader who had barely spoken during September now volunteered to read entire pages without hesitation. Another student who once believed books were too difficult proudly carried home a library card tucked inside a favorite novel. Every small success reminded Savannah that change rarely announced itself. It simply appeared one patient day after another. Late one afternoon, after the final dismissal bell echoed through the building, the principal invited the faculty into the library for a brief meeting. Instead of discussing budgets or testing schedules, she placed a framed photograph on the table. It showed Eleanor Hayes surrounded by smiling students decades earlier, standing in front of the very same oak bookshelf that still rested inside room 214. Beside the photograph sat a small brass plate engraved with a single sentence. "One teacher can become the beginning of someone else's future." The principal smiled warmly at her staff. "This will remain in our library from now on, not as a memorial to one person, but as a reminder of what every educator has the chance to become." The room fell silent as teachers studied the photograph. Savannah looked toward the familiar face of Miss Hayes and quietly smiled, knowing her influence had never truly ended. It had simply continued through countless people who never even realized they were carrying it forward. As the meeting ended, Savannah lingered behind to straighten several chairs. When she stepped outside, she found Roman Castellano waiting beneath softly falling snow. Tiny white flakes rested across the shoulders of his dark coat, while the playground stood peacefully empty behind him. There were no meetings waiting for him, no hurried phone calls, no visible reminder of the complicated world he normally carried. For once, he simply looked like someone returning to a place that felt like home. "I thought you might still be here," he said. Savannah smiled. "You always seem to know when I stay late." Roman glanced toward the classroom windows glowing against the early evening sky. Teachers who care usually do. They slowly walked across the quiet playground together. The repaired basketball court now carried footprints left by children who had played there during recess. The library windows shone warmly in the distance, filled with new books already showing signs of eager hands turning their pages. Savannah looked around the school with quiet satisfaction. "You fulfilled Miss Hayes's request." Roman gently shook his head. "No." She looked at him curiously. "I only continued what she started." They stopped beside the old oak tree where golden leaves had once covered the ground. Now its bare branches stretched peacefully toward the winter sky. Savannah reached into her bag and removed a folded stack of handwritten letters from her students. "These are thank you notes they wrote for everyone who helped our school this year," she explained. "None of them know your name." Roman smiled softly. "That is exactly how it should be." She handed him one letter anyway, then read just one. He unfolded the paper carefully. Crayon handwriting covered the page with uneven lines and misspelled words. "Thank you to the person who fixed our playground. My little brother laughs there every day. I do not know who you are, but I hope someone is nice to you too." Roman read the final sentence twice before carefully folding the letter again. His eyes drifted toward the empty swings moving gently in the cold breeze. "Miss Hayes would have liked this," Savannah whispered. He nodded slowly. She would have loved knowing the children never stopped being the reason. Snow continued falling around them, soft enough that neither hurried toward shelter. The city beyond the school carried on with its endless movement. Yet, inside those familiar brick walls, time seemed to slow once again. Savannah realized she was no longer standing beside the mysterious man she had once feared to approach. She was standing beside someone whose greatest achievement had never been the power he possessed, but the promise he had quietly kept for decades. As they walked back toward the school entrance together, the library lights reflected across the snow-covered sidewalk like tiny stars leading them home, and for the first time since their paths crossed, neither of them felt as though they were carrying the future alone. Spring arrived almost unnoticed, replacing snow with gentle rain and bare branches with fresh green leaves that framed the familiar brick walls of Jefferson Elementary. The school breathed with a different kind of energy now. Children filled the library corners that had once stood empty. The repaired playground echoed with laughter every afternoon. Teachers smiled a little more often, not because their work had become easier, but because hope had quietly become part of the building again. Savannah Reed unlocked room 214 before sunrise, just as she had done countless mornings before. She carried a stack of essays to her desk and paused beside the old oak bookshelf that had witnessed generations of children discovering stories for the very first time. The student chair with the faded initials still rested near the reading corner. She gently brushed her hand across its worn wooden back before sitting down to begin grading papers. Outside, dawn slowly painted the sky with soft shades of gold and blue. A quiet knock interrupted the silence. Savannah looked toward the doorway and smiled before a single word was spoken. Roman Castellano stood there with 2 cups of coffee and the same calm expression she had come to know so well. There were no security vehicles waiting outside, no hurried phone calls, no invisible distance separating 2 different worlds. Only a man who had returned to the place that had first taught him what kindness looked like. "You are early," Savannah said with a gentle smile. Roman glanced toward the stack of essays covering her desk. "I had a feeling you would be here," she laughed softly. "Some habits are difficult to break." He placed 1 warm cup beside her papers before quietly taking the same student chair where he had sat months earlier while protecting the sleep of someone he had never met. Neither of them mentioned that morning. They no longer needed to. The silence between them had become comfortable instead of uncertain. Savannah opened the first essay while Roman reached for another stack without being asked. "You know these are 3rd grade reading reflections," she teased. "I may not grade them correctly. I trust your instructions." She handed him the grading guide, smiling as he carefully compared every student's answer against her handwritten notes. The rising sunlight slowly filled the classroom, warming the wooden floors and illuminating the colorful artwork hanging from every wall. Children's drawings of families, dreams, and favorite books surrounded them like quiet reminders of why this room mattered. After several minutes, Savannah noticed Roman smiling at one particular paper. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the page toward her. A little boy had written, "My favorite place is school because everybody lets me try again if I make a mistake." Savannah felt emotion catch gently in her chest. "That sounds familiar." Roman nodded. "It does." Another peaceful silence followed before Savannah looked toward him. "Do you ever wonder what Miss Hayes would think if she could see this classroom today?" Roman studied the sunlight resting across the old bookshelf before answering. "I think she already can." Savannah looked around the room once more. Nothing about it was extravagant. The desks still carried years of tiny scratches. The bulletin boards would soon need replacing. The classroom clock remained a few minutes fast, yet somehow everything felt complete. The promise that had begun decades earlier had never depended on perfect buildings or unlimited budgets. It had depended on ordinary people choosing compassion every single day. The first school bus pulled into the parking lot outside. Children's voices drifted through the open window, growing louder with every passing second. Savannah gathered the finished essays, while Roman neatly stacked the remaining papers exactly as he had found them. Before standing, he rested one hand lightly against the back of the old student chair. "Thank you," he said quietly. Savannah looked at him with gentle curiosity. "For what?" He smiled, the kind of smile that no longer carried the weight of unfinished promises. "For keeping the door open." The first students hurried into the hallway moments later, filling Jefferson Elementary with the joyful noise that always marked the beginning of another ordinary day. As Savannah welcomed each child into room 214, Roman stepped into the hallway and paused only once before leaving. He looked back through the classroom window where she was already kneeling beside a student who needed help opening a new book. He smiled with quiet certainty, then walked into the bright morning, knowing the promise Eleanor Hayes had once entrusted to a frightened little boy no longer belonged to him alone. Inside the classroom, sunlight reached the old oak bookshelf, the worn student chair, and the desk where 2 empty coffee cups rested beside neatly graded papers. Months earlier, one exhausted teacher had fallen asleep there with no one expecting company before dawn. Now the room welcomed a new morning with 2 lives forever changed by the simple decision to stay, and as the laughter of children filled every corner once more, the classroom proved that kindness, once given freely, never truly reaches an ending because it quietly becomes the beginning of someone else's story.